presidential address here on Wednesday evening here on the East Coast, where I am Wednesday late afternoon on the West Coast in Las Vegas, where our guest Ralph Michaels is. Generally, you will see during this show our fearless leader at wagertalk.com, the Prez, but instead you see me one more time hosting for Prez, subbing in all week long on his shows. And tonight we welcome in Ralph to do the presidential address. We'll take a look at the NFL card for this week. I have not had the pleasure of directly working with Ralph thus far, but this will be my first time. We've been part of group casts in various places. But for tonight, we're going to work together here, and we're going to get you through this NFL card. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome him in. Ralph, how are you this afternoon? Great to be with you here on the show.
Rob, my pleasure. Well-respected name, a lot of friends that have spoken highly of you. And all I got to say is this. For all those watching this video, Prez is not on. If I see any thumbs down without Prez on, and I'm going to have to hear about it next week, all I want to see is 100% thumbs up because Prez is not on this podcast. And Rob, you and I get to go through the NFL card together.
Yes, we do, Ralph. And I'll tell you a quick story. Marco and I did the Prez's Betting Edge show on Monday, and we have now crossed 2,000 views without getting one single dislike. So you're absolutely correct.
Awesome.
Generally speaking, when I am on with the Prez, the first comment is a dislike. So we want to go ahead and avoid that here. Hopefully we bring you the best information we can here, guys. Those of you watching, that's what we're here to do, try to help you cash tickets. We're going to go back and forth, as I mentioned earlier, with these games. Ralph, you had told me off air that you guys like to start the show with a little spot called TNA. So why don't you take it from here and go ahead and let's start at the top of the board with Rams at San Francisco.
You know, Rob, before we do that, I'm just going to go through some NFL systems that apply for this week.
Sure.
It's our little trends and angles section. And I've got three of them that I just want to mention. And, you know, when I bring up trends and angles, they're not specifically just to bet on for that game, but I want our viewers to, number one, understand why a system is successful. Number two, perhaps like the game more because that system likes that game, or perhaps keep you off a game, but you're never betting a trend or a system just because we're giving it out here. The first one is quite simple. It's from week 8 on, so we're in the second half of the NFL system. A team has a win percentage of 65% or more, and they're off a previous home loss. So second half of the season, we have a very nice winning team. They're off a home loss, just like New Orleans was this past Monday. New Orleans fit the system last week. The system has gone 20 wins, 8 losses, and 4 pushes since 2013. That's 71%. That play on this week is on San Francisco. System number 2. When you're playing a division foe and you lost to that foe last game and you're off a previous loss, now you're a favorite of 4 or more. The LA Chargers fit into that system this week. LA Chargers lost to Oakland the last time they played them. They lost their last game. They're a favorite of 4 or more. Those teams since 2012 have gone 32-15-1 against the spread, 68%. And the third and final system, teams that lost against a division, you're playing a division foe, and then the last time you played them, you won the game, but it was sloppy. You turned the ball over 3 or more times. Well, those teams in the rematch have gone 18-41-1, 29.5% against the spread. That is to fade the New York Giants. So 3 systems. It says to play San Fran, play the Chargers, play against the Giants, but it's more to think about what the systems mean, realize why they're successful, and use them to handicapping. Now, Rob, normally the Prez and I go through prime time games, and he goes through his little thing saying, oh, I'm going to change the screen, and it says prime time games. With no Thursday game, with the Saturday games, 3 Saturday games, then the card, we're just going to run them through rotation order, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that sounds great, Ralph. And boy, oh boy, for those watching, that segment Ralph just gave you there on those system plays, pay attention. They all made sense, and certainly they have produced winning tickets. So that's good knowledge, good to know. We will start at the top of the card here. LA Rams, San Francisco 49ers. Number 451, 452 in the rotation. However, even though it's on top of the card, Ralph, it's the last game on Saturday. It's the night contest, and I'm going to go through a couple of playoff scenarios here. For the Rams, of course, last week's loss against the Dallas Cowboys, for all intent and purposes, not mathematically, but for all intent and purposes, has eliminated the Rams from the playoffs. They would have to win out, and they need an awful lot of help. For San Francisco, they unexpectedly wound up dropping to the number 5 seed after that loss to Atlanta, a game which, brought a smile back to my face, Ralph, after I had the frown on holding the Washington +6 ticket, losing the way I did to Philadelphia, and then, of course, holding a San Francisco-Atlanta over ticket and getting 12 points in 2 seconds to cash that. I don't know which is luckier or unluckier, but they, as we say in the business, they all seem to even out. The 49ers here, they can make their way back to the number 1 seed. They have to win out. The final win would be against Seattle. They get that opportunity to play the Seahawks. So a lot on the line here for the San Francisco 49ers. For the Rams, not so much. First time around, it was a 20-7 49er win. A game, Ralph, where San Francisco really whipped Los Angeles at the line of scrimmage. The pass rush got to Jared Goff, and as we know, Jared Goff, when things aren't really perfectly in place for him, things tend to go wrong for the LA Ram offense. So we'll see. San Francisco's a banged-up club, but not necessarily across the defensive line. We'll see if that defensive line can apply some pressure here as well in this contest, because if they do, I have the feeling that they may be able to certainly cause some havoc for the LA Ram offense. I don't know what they've got left in the tank, Ralph. And real quick, I just want to mention one thing and get your thought on it, because I had a conversation earlier today on another show with a colleague of ours, Joe Rainieri, and we talked a little bit about teams playing spoiler at this time of season. They're not going anywhere, but they want to wreck it for somebody else. Just from my general perspective, for me, spoilers, I look closer if they're divisional rivals. In this case, they are divisional rivals. So if the Rams have anything left, they might want to spoil something for San Francisco, put them lower in the playoff seedings, so to speak. We have another instance that we'll talk about later, KC and the Bears, where the Bears could play a spoiler, but non-conference game, I don't know how much they hate Kansas City. So for spoiler action, I generally look toward divisional foes and apply it more in those cases than I do in others. Real quick, and I'm going to turn it over to you. This game opened at 6-46.5. It's now 6.5 and 45 almost universally. So I'll turn the LA Rams San Francisco over to you.
Rob, you talk about spoilers. This is the case where, number 1, you're still mathematically in the playoff hunt. Number 2, if something happens and you're not, you play the spoiler. So I think that adds additive incentive. But, the Rams team just isn't right. Gurley not having rushed for 100 yards in any game this year just is mind-baffling. And you look at the sacks, they only have allowed 21 sacks, 3.9 sack percentage. That's a great sack percentage. So Goff's numbers at 17-15 are mind-boggling. I look at San Fran, and, I'm not on this game for this reason, because what is Kyle Shanahan's motivation? Is it, with the injury report, with Sherman, with a lot of guys banged up, he probably has the choice to say, well, I'm going to go for the number 1 seed, and I will likely have a banged up team, or I can have a very healthy team and have the number 5 seed. So you don't know what his take is moving forward. But I if I have to make a choice for our viewers, and since this is the primetime game on Saturday, I'm going to do that. I would lean San Fran and Kyle Shanahan to come out and say, I think that I don't want to go to New Orleans. I'm going to play for that number 1 seed.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Ralph, because I actually saw this week odds to win the NFC, where San Francisco, I believe, was now the 5th choice at 7-1, a team that's going to get healthier as we go along. 7-1 is not the greatest number of all. You can make more money different ways, just continually betting San Francisco, but certainly they're not the fifth best team in the NFC when healthy. Let's move to the Buffalo-New England game real quick here, because there's a lot at stake in this game. 4:30 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. Weather conditions in this game, guys, going to be about 25 degrees. Clear, though. Nothing else to bother these teams. They're both used to playing in cold, so the weather renders itself irrelevant, in my mind, in this particular contest. For Buffalo, they sit as the number 4 seed as we speak. If they win out, they'll win the AFC East because they'll have a better conference record than the New England Patriots. Their last game is a home game against the New York Jets. So for Buffalo, a lot at stake here. They played this team tough the first time around. For the Patriots, they sit as the number 2 seed. Win out, you lock up the number 2. Their last game is home against Miami. Both of these teams fully focused, Ralph. I mentioned earlier it was a dogfight the first time around. Buffalo came up with a clutch victory over Pittsburgh last week. And the New England offense still sputtering up and down the field. How do you see Buffalo, New England here?
Well, you talk about Buffalo in their first game. It was a game where they had a 375 to 224-yard edge. You had a 150-yard edge over Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. That has to give you a lot of confidence. They were -3 turnovers in that game. That's the difference. Rob, the old adage in sports handicap, defense travels. Well, that Bills defense that's allowing 292 yards and 18 first downs, they've covered 9 straight games away from home because they've kept the game close, because in a lot of those games they were a dog. I look at New England, they have topped over 300 yards once in 5 games. We now realize that without Edelman having someone to stretch the field, people know they can defend Edelman. I think the Bills are a live player.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Certainly, Buffalo has met every challenge so far. I know the knock on them, Ralph, the rap, so to speak, is that they haven't beaten anybody supposedly good yet. But Pittsburgh certainly qualified last week as a good win. And, boy, their losses. I mean, you lose by 3 to the Ravens with a chance to win the game. You're inside the red zone, and you lose in heartbreaking fashion as they did to New England the first time. Those very, very close losses almost are as good as beating bad teams. So I've liked the Buffalo Bills myself. Closing out the Saturday card, or actually opening up the Saturday card, but closing it in rotation order, are the Houston Texans, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now for Houston, a little bit to go through here, Ralph, so I'm going to spell it out a little bit slower here. I'll read it to you. Number 4 seed right now as we speak. Their last game is going to be a home game against Tennessee, and doesn't the schedule maker want to pat himself on the back for having Houston, Tennessee play twice in the final 3 weeks of the season for that division? Now, a win here for Houston would clinch the AFC South. It would be theirs. So Tennessee, when they play on Sunday, they would know that. For the Houston Texans, it doesn't end there, though, because, they've defeated New England and Kansas City this year, and they do have the opportunity to move up. It'll be an interesting decision by their head coach, Ralph, and I'll get your take on that, because you talked a little bit earlier about what Kyle Shanahan's motivation might be. For the Texans, the possibility does exist if they were to win out, and if Kansas City and New England would lose once in their final 2 games, which is possible looking at their schedule, Houston would end up number 2. Do they play it out in Week 16 when, generally speaking, when a playoff bid is locked up, coaches tend to rest people like Deshaun Watson, DeAndre Hopkins? You're putting a lot at risk in Week 16 if you play them. But for Houston, the division crown is at stake here. They can go ahead and lock it up. Whether in this particular game, the first half is going to be fine. But there's a lot of Florida weather going on with bowl games on Saturday, and even here in Tampa. Second half, there's a 35% chance that you might get rain for the second half. The wind is irrelevant in Tampa. It's relevant in other places. But I'm going to turn it over here, Ralph. Houston, Tampa Bay. And Houston, by the way, before I get too carried away, this game opened at pick and 53, and the total has really come down. The number here, Houston, obviously pick up to -3, huge push on the Texans. but also a push to the under from 53 down to 49.5.
You look at the line move, and it's directly correlated with the Tampa Bay injury report. This is a Tampa Bay team that's won 4 straight. This is the Tampa Bay team where, Jameis has 30 touchdowns. That sounds great, but 24 interceptions to go with it. And for those that, don't follow, Bruce Arians, I think, has had the number one passer as far as yards is concerned each of the last 5 years. So that is no shock with Bruce Arians as the head coach of the Buccaneers. I look at the Texans and, to me, it seems that they're good enough to beat anyone. They make mistakes enough to lose to anyone. You've been sacked 40 times. I mean, you have a mobile quarterback. This is Deshaun Watson, who has 376 yards. It's not as if, though, you have Tom Brady or Bernie Kosar back there. You have a mobile quarterback, but you still have been sacked 40 times. Back-to-back road games in December are tough. There's no question. Back-to-back road games after perhaps almost clinching your division, playing at Tennessee and going to Tampa Bay is further. But I just can't back this Tampa Bay team. You're 0-5-2 your last 7 games at home, and you're 11-1 over under Tampa Bay is. Why? Because you have the dual threat in Jameis Winston. I say the dual threat because he scores for the offense and he scores for the defense. I'm going to just say that I look for a higher scoring game here, and I'm going to lean with the over.
Yeah, and those injuries you talk about, Ralph, they are significant. I mean, last week it was only Mike Evans, but during last week's game it became Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, the top 2 receivers on the team. Jameis himself a little bit banged up. So for Tampa Bay, that offense, he threw for a lot of yards against the Detroit Lions, and Houston's not necessarily a great secondary, but boy, oh boy, at some point when you're running around with number 4 and number 5 wide receivers, it does make a little bit of a difference. So we'll see how that game pans out. Let's move to the Sunday card, Ralph. Detroit's going to go to Denver. Detroit basically a dead team in the water. This game opened up Denver 6.5 with a total of 37.5. It's been pushed up to Denver -7. Total up to 38 in most spots. I'll just give you a quick observation on my part about the Denver Broncos. They seem to be at this point in time, Ralph, the ultimate pendulum team. 1 week they're playing somebody very tough. You get your hopes up with them. The next week they come back down to earth. It was, I think, the Minnesota game or whatever game was ahead of the Buffalo game because they played on the road very tough, went to Buffalo, got spanked. Then they come back and Drew Lock has a great game. And last week against Kansas City, albeit in a snowstorm. So we'll have to give Drew Lock a little bit of leeway there. But they did not play a good football game whatsoever against KC last week. Here they get the Lions, who have been a train wreck for the last few weeks. However, Matt Patricia kept his job, and so did their GM. Re-signed, I think, yesterday. So for the Broncos, a 7-point favorite. They haven't been in that position very much this season. Detroit, as I mentioned, defensively bad, offensively on their third-team quarterback produced David Blau. Give us a quick take on Detroit at Denver.
Robbie, you and I know there's just certain games that once you handicap it, you go through the scenarios, you're just not going to back either team. I'm not backing Detroit, who is 0-8-1 as an away dog their last 9 games. I am not going to lay a touchdown with Denver, who is 1-7-1 as a home favorite, has rookies playing. No one thought it was going to be Drew Lock against David Blau. I am going to pass and give a lean to the under, and let's say move on.
Yeah, and amazingly, Ralph, and what might be the most surprising thing in that game, the weather in Denver in December is going to be real good. 57 degrees at kickoff, only touching 44 by game's end. So good weather in Denver for that one. I agree that there's certain times where you just pull out the red pen, you put an X through the game, and you move on. Here we're going to move on to a game that you talked about in your system and angles segment, the Oakland Raiders at the LA Chargers. This game opened with the Chargers 6.5, total of 47. Currently, as we speak right now, Ralph, they have been pushed up to a 7-point favorite. Totals come down to 45. Obviously, no home field advantage where the LA Chargers are concerned. The opponent usually overwhelms this stadium when the Chargers are at so-called home. But I'd like to pick your brain for a minute on the emotional state of the Oakland Raiders. Last week they had that game in hand. What was the final game in the black hole? I believe it was 16-9, and David Carr had just run for a first down with about a minute 50 left in that game, and actually took an extra 10 steps or 10 yards prancing around, making gestures to the crowd how, he was the big hero and Oakland was going to send the fans out happy. Unfortunately for them, a team that was presumably dead in the water, Jacksonville, because Oakland attracted all kinds of money last week in that game. Jacksonville turns around. Gardner Minshew didn't get the memo, ties the game. They go on and win the game. And after the game, all hell breaks loose in Oakland Stadium. And John Gruden's issuing apologies to the fans in his post-game press conference. So I don't know where the Raiders stand heading into this. This is a long-time rivalry. Both teams dislike each other. But how much could Oakland have motivationally here after what just happened last week?
Rob, going back a step in that Oakland game, they led 16-3. They had the ball 11 times last week, and they got into the opposing Jacksonville's territory 8 times, and you score 16 points. I mean, that's just unheard of. That to me is a team that just wasn't motivated, wasn't focused. But, what do you expect? I mean, these Raiders are now thinking, okay, this is it. We're moving. We're buying houses. Where am I living in LA? Where am I going? Where am I practicing next year? I think that's a huge distraction. When the Ravens moved from Cleveland, again, I'm a Cleveland fan, boom, you didn't have that scenario where they were worrying about playing those last games and what was going to happen next year. So this is a brand new dynamic. While we all know the Chargers are a play on the road, faded home situation, I have to think they have more pride. I mean, Melvin Gordon fumbling those 2 times he did against Minnesota, Melvin Gordon and the Chargers turning the ball over 7 times like they did. They're still playing hard. They're still putting up yardage. They put up 500 yards plus in Jacksonville 2 weeks ago. I don't rarely say I'm going to like the Chargers at home, but I just think this is the only way to go with the game because Oakland's playing the Chargers. They're going to Denver. They're making their final road trips. They're probably packing their bags as we speak and getting ready to move to Las Vegas.
It could possibly be checkout time for the Oakland Raiders. I agree with you, Ralph. That was a disheartening loss last week for both team and fans alike. Let's move down to 461, 462. Jacksonville at the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta, talking about a team that really hasn't quit on the season, Ralph. Boy, they played hard last week for their head coach, Dan Quinn, who at more than one time this season has been speculated to be not only on the hot seat, but out the door. And it hasn't happened yet. The team continues to play well for him. They get a home game here against Jacksonville, a team which may have turned the end of their season around last week. Maybe Gardner Minshew, again, a spark for this Jacksonville team. Although I'll say this, you talked about the 16-3 score in that Raider-Jacksonville game last week. For a majority of that game, Jacksonville didn't look like they had any spark. They did win, but they really didn't look like a team that wanted to turn their season around. For the Atlanta Falcons here, they open as a 7-point favorite, total of 46. They remain a 7-point favorite. Totals bumped up a little bit to 46.5. No weather concerns because this is in a dome. Jacksonville, Atlanta, a meaningless game as far as playoffs are concerned, Ralph. But do you like the way the Falcons are headed enough to play them at this price?
I think looking at how a team finishes and the enthusiasm a team has is very important week 16 and 17 in the NFL. Jacksonville, you go back and you look at their losing streak. They had lost 5 straight prior to beating Oakland. And in those 5 games, they had not topped 370 yards. And in fact, they're averaging under 300 yards those last 6 games. 14, 15, and 17 first downs in the last 3 weeks. I don't care if you got to win against Oakland. That's not going to cut it for me. Matt Ryan playing hard. putting up 290 yards at San Francisco is not the worst performance. Other people have done worse. Putting up to 29 points is impressive. Atlanta has a very good shot at being on my card. I do like them here.
Atlanta Falcons closing the season pretty strongly. They turned it around a few games back. We'll see if they continue on that march here against Jacksonville on Sunday. Next up, Ralph, it's New Orleans at Tennessee. Boy, we just saw the the New Orleans Saints go absolutely crazy with Drew Brees breaking Peyton Manning's touchdown record, 34-7 stomping of the Indianapolis Colts. Indianapolis really didn't show up for that one, or maybe they showed up and just couldn't compete with New Orleans. And it's interesting, Ralph, because, the New Orleans defensive front had some real key injuries in that game where I thought that perhaps Indianapolis would be able to run the football the way they like a little bit and maybe play action off of that. I did hold a ticket on over 46.5. Didn't get there because Indy didn't help any. But here in this case, New Orleans opens at Tennessee in what's a meaningful game for both. They open -1, total of 51. They have risen up now to a 2.5-point favorite. I do see a couple of threes out there. So if you like New Orleans, you might want to catch the 2.5s before they disappear here. Total has gone from 51 down to 50 or 50.5. For the Saints, Ralph, there's ways that they can become the number 1 seed in the NFC by winning out, and one of those is the tie with Seattle by virtue of their victory over Seattle, a Teddy Bridgewater-led victory, by the way, earlier this year. They would become the number 1 seed. So there's still stuff to play for here for both of these teams. As I mentioned earlier, Tennessee will know if they're in a wild card battle only with the Pittsburgh Steelers or if they're in a divisional battle with the Houston Texans still by virtue of Houston's result the day before. So this, like I say, this is an interesting game. Both teams should come to play. Seems like a fair number, but it looks to me like the money thinks New Orleans' motivation might be a little better based on, personnel and the fact that they have the chance to rise to number 1.
Yeah, I don't think there's a question. You look at Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees and Michael Thomas, and 99 out of 100 people are going to take them over Derrick Henry, Tannehill, and Brown. Not that Tannehill hasn't done a fantastic job with a 17-6 ratio. Not that Derrick Henry isn't an absolute stud with 1,300 yards and almost 5 yards per carry. But, I think the Saints have more motivation than most. At home this year, they're plus 101 yards per game. On the road, they're minus 32 yards per game. We know Sean Payton's success at home compared to on the road for the playoffs. We know this offense is built to be a dome team. So much more so than the other teams, I think the Saints do have a reason to go out and play well and try to get the highest seed they can. I look at Tennessee, and you reeled off 4 straight wins that got you back in the chase. You played well against Houston. You did absolutely nothing wrong against Houston. You just weren't the better team on the field that day. So, they lose to Houston at home. Yeah, they still had a 58-yard edge, but they didn't win the game. I think that hurts them moving forward. I have a slight lean to the Saints in this game.
Yeah, an unfortunate interception down on the goal line in a 0-0 game last week. Tennessee and Houston provided Houston the early 7-0 lead as that pick kind of bounced around, landed in Houston's hands. They ran it back. Very quickly here, Ralph, there used to be I'll call it an adage that people followed, that playing New Orleans outdoors late in the season was not something that they generally wanted to do. In this case, in Nashville, Tennessee, we're going to have steady rain throughout the contest, according to the projected weather forecast. 4 quarters worth of rain. Does the grass field, the outdoor conditions, cause any concern on your part with the Saints?
Well, I'm looking that up as we speak, Rob. And, the one thing that, for those that follow You Bet on It and the TNA segment Kelly Stewart and I do, in December, if you just blindly play unders on grass fields in December, you have cashed 59.2% in the last 5 years. Why? People don't remember these grass fields, and people don't tend to, you may not be as old as me, Rob, but back in the 90s, USA Today had grass and turf records for every team, every scenario you looked at, because the turf wasn't as good, the grass wasn't as good, and you had different ways you handicapped games. So I think it does matter. I think it can slow it down. The difference with the Saints team is you have Alvin Kamara now who can finally rush the ball. You've never had Kamara and Murray and guys that can run the ball for over 4 yards per carry and not put the onus on the quarterback to throw. So that's the difference in the Saints team, that they're a solid defensive team with a semblance of a run game.
Yeah, and it's the exact reason why I asked, Ralph, because going back as long as I go back in this business to 1992, I still consider grass and turf. I don't think it's nearly as talked about nowadays as it was years gone by, like you just mentioned there. So we'll see. New Orleans does have the ability to run the football now, which is a good point, because there's been a lot of years where they've been reliant on the pass. Outdoor stuff gave them trouble, might not give them any trouble here.
Hey, Rob, I just ran on the database. I went back and looked since 2015.
Okay.
Week 11 on, the Saints on the road, on grass, 8-7-1 against the spread. So pretty much 500. And again, besides Oakland, I mean, most facilities now know how to take care of grass. We used to have situations, an example, the Pittsburgh Steelers used to have their high school playoffs play on Friday, and then perhaps the Panthers played on Saturday. And by the time you got to Sunday, you were playing on a mud pit. But, those times have changed where they actually change out turfs now and can resod an entire field, where it has gotten better than it used to be when we were younger.
There's no doubt about it. The only one off the top of my head I can think of that's had difficulties since the stadium's inception would be San Francisco. The Giants, talking about grass fields, right, Ralph? The Giants are going to play the Redskins. That's grass. Redskins opened here 241 the total. They pushed up a little bit to 2.5. 41 remains the total. We're not going to see bad weather here. We're going to see pretty mild temperatures for the Mid-Atlantic in this particular contest. Again, a motivational question that I'll put to you. Last week, the New York Giants do everything to send Eli Manning off with a final home victory in his career. Celebratory after the game. It was a big win. They had a huge second half on the road. Generally speaking, I would consider this a pretty fierce divisional rivalry, Giants and Redskins. Neither team's playing for anything. The Redskins played a tremendous game in my mind last Sunday. The only thing they did wrong was not cash my ticket, with Dwayne Haskins kind of just throwing it to Nigel Bradham down the sidelines he goes. But how about the Giants' motivation here as we get into week 15 and they're done playing at home? They're on the road. Redskins, to me, look like a team that's playing hard for Coach Callahan. But will the Giants, sit on cloud nine, so to speak, a little bit through this game, or will they come to play as well?
Well, let me bring up a couple interesting tens. We talk about the Giants being a train wreck this year, but they've gone 10-2 as an away dog. Daniel Jones kept chucking the ball down. I mean, he scored late against Tampa Bay. Then he goes to Detroit and scores on the last play to cover. Then they play Chicago and he covers late. And then they play Philadelphia and they cover late. So, the Giants as a whole have been very sound. I can't lay points with Washington, even though in the last 4 weeks, they beat Detroit, they beat Carolina, they cover against Green Bay, and then we all know they should have covered against Philadelphia. So you have a team that very realistically should be 4-0 against the spread, should be 2-2 the last couple weeks, but it's a different mindset being a favorite. I don't trust Dwayne Haskins. Again, I'm a Cleveland guy. I'm an Ohio guy. I loved what he did with the Buckeyes, but it's still a quarterback who only played 1 year at Ohio State. And there's a lot to be said for a quarterback late in the year who's trying to learn how to win games, which we saw he couldn't do last week. On the flip side, be it Eli Manning or Daniel Jones, Daniel Jones was under David Cutcliffe for multiple years. He was a multi-year starter. He's gone through, we know Cutcliffe at Duke was a quarterback whisperer with the Mannings. I think Daniel Jones is much better handled to handle the situation. So another game that I'm unfortunately going to say I don't want any part of the Giants off the win, and I want no part of Washington as a small favorite or even in a pick'em situation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ralph. Perhaps the total in good weather might be worth looking at there. Only a 41 number. Seems like the Redskins have a little bit of offense put together now, at least that connection between Haskins and McLaurin, two Ohio State boys. Pittsburgh is going to take on the Jets, and here we go, Ralph. Here's a game where a team needs a win against a team that is not playing for anything. Pittsburgh, by virtue of that loss to Buffalo last week, has put themselves in a dogfight for that number 6 seed in the AFC. So for the Steelers, it's a semi-short work week. It was a Sunday night game. It wasn't a Monday night game, but it is. And there's not a lot of travel involved here when you're going from Pittsburgh to East Rutherford, New Jersey. Weather, again, much like I just talked about in Washington, this being more New England or Northeast, is still going to be pretty good. Only difference is instead of in the 40s, they'll be in the 30s according to these weather forecasts. Pittsburgh opens up here 3. They remain 3. Total started 38.5, down to 37.5, and some 37s. And you might get some quizzical looks from people, Ralph, who would knee-jerk reactions say, well, Pittsburgh -3 against the Jets. So what are you kidding me? Pittsburgh needs the game. Jets don't. We know that NFL handicapping is far more in-depth than just this team stinks and this team needs it. The team that needs it doesn't always win. I'm sure there's a lot of numbers on that as well. So how do you see Pittsburgh and the Jets going here?
I don't know if we've seen a worse offense in the NFL in a lot of years. You look back at the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. Granted, you've had multiple quarterbacks. In only one game has Pittsburgh had over 340 yards of offense. I mean, that to me is just incredible. And that was a Miami game at home where you won 27-14. The Jets, I have a lot of reasons to say the Jets, to me, are the better team on the field. Their defense has played great. Your offense, you didn't have Sam Darnold early. You were playing third-string quarterbacks that weren't even with the team. You got Le'Veon Bell against his old team. Pittsburgh 2-9 as a favorite against the spread. I will say this, the Steelers 25-1 over-under as an away favorite, which makes complete sense to me because you have Tomlin being conservative. He's not going to let the Duck make mistakes. You have a defense that has held people to under 20 first downs per game. I am just going to say I agree with that under assessment and think that the Jets are actually the better offense on the field.
Yeah, and for Pittsburgh, what looked like was close to being a possibility or the possible return of Juju Smith-Schuster last week didn't pan out, and he's already downgraded to out for this week. So that does not help their offense whatsoever. As you said, head coach Tomlin has decided to stick with Devlin Hodges at quarterback rather than go back to Mason Rudolph. I don't know what that says about Mason Rudolph, but it can't be good. Cincinnati at Miami here, Ralph, another game where I don't know. Maybe these two teams would rather enhance their draft position. I know that Cincinnati can't be passed by Miami, but Miami didn't look too good in the second half last week. This game opened up the home team Dolphins 2.5 with a total of 45.5. It's now pick 'em. A lot of Cincinnati money here. The total from 45.5 up to 46.5, which to me is the play that makes sense over between these two teams. Miami with their receivers back last week did enough late to get that game over the total against the Giants. Certainly Cincinnati should be able to score against this team. mad rush to Cincinnati here, 2.5-point move. Agree with the move, disagree, or something we just red X right off the board?
Rob, I was laughing because I was looking up on the database. I went back to 2010 and week 15 on. So week 15, 16, 17, the last 3 weeks of the season, only 5 other times have we had 2 teams match up with less than 3 or fewer wins. So we have 2 this week. We had 5 in 10 years in NFL action, and we have the Dolphins, Bengals, and the Redskins, Giants. I will say that the favorite has gone 5-0 straight up, and the favorite has gone 4-1 against the spread. But again, both of those games were basically, within a coin toss. So, now we're looking at motivation. Do we agree that the Bengals have more motivation? I don't know. You have 2 first-year head coaches, and I think that's the difference. When you have teams that win 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 games in college or pros, and you have a first-year head coach, everyone on the field knows they're playing for a job. It's not as if, though, you have a lame duck coach. They know they're going to get a new coach taking over. Zach Taylor's going to be there for Cincinnati. Brian Flores is going to be there for Miami. But, is Fitzpatrick going to be there? Who knows who they draft? Is Andy Dalton going to be there? Who knows who they draft? I'm gonna say that I am gonna not give an opinion on this game besides that angle I got and move on.
I was just real quick thinking in my head here, Ralph. There was, and I'm missing the name of the head coach for Arizona a couple years back, who only got 1 year and was ousted for Cliff Kingsbury. Steve somebody, I'm just forgetting his name, but that was an example of 1 and out. But you're right, these 2 guys here aren't going anywhere. So the teams, hey, maybe they'll play hard. I will say this. We talked earlier about Florida weather for bowl games this weekend and in Tampa Bay on Saturday. In Miami, it's not going to be great. 90% chance of thunderstorms with 20-mile-per-hour winds at kickoff all the way through the first half. And in the second half, a 70 to 80% chance that those thunderstorms continue while the winds die down a couple miles per hour. So, we've seen the total go up. I said that I would prefer to play the over in that game, but certainly not in those types of weather conditions. So, we're talking here on Wednesday, guys that are watching this. Be sure to check your weather reports throughout the week and see how that goes, because Florida weather for sure can turn on a dime. Let's get to the
Rob,
next game. Yeah.
Excuse me. Steve Wilkes is the guy you're talking about.
Steve Wilkes. There you go. 1 and out. Kind of felt bad for him. He didn't get a great opportunity, but it does happen on occasion. Rare that it happens, but it has happened. We're going to move to a game that's being played in a dome, so there will be no weather concerns here. The Carolina Panthers at the Indianapolis Colts. Colts open 6.5, 46.5. They have moved to a 7-point favorite. Totals come down 1/2 point to 46. When last we saw the Indianapolis Colts, we talked about it earlier, they were being shellacked by the New Orleans Saints. Now they're on a short work week, returning home. But I tell you, Ralph, they're playing against a team that, and I never like to use the phrase packed it in, because these guys are all professionals. They're all seeking a job somewhere. You just mentioned that before. So packing it in is a strong phrase to use. But Carolina certainly has been on a downward dissension for a few weeks now. Indianapolis didn't look great. T.Y. Hilton, in particular, didn't look great Monday night. Seemed like he was half-heartedly running his routes, protecting his injury. 7 points here. I know Indy's the better team, but there's nothing left to play for at this point in time. I could almost see a close game ensuing here, but money thinks that the Colts are the right side of this game. How do you see it?
I am going to look at the under, and I am going to, unfortunately, disagree a little bit and look at the dog, just because, I was on Seattle last week, and, a tough beat if people backed it and got the 6, which most people did. Seattle misses an extra point on their first touchdown, and you're up 30-10. Now, you could say Carolina kept trying and scored 2 touchdowns, or you could say Seattle was without 6 defensive starters and had no option but to play prevent defense and just try to run some clock off. So, it's one of those things that I look at Kyle Allen. I remember back the Green Bay game. He scored late. They got the ball again. He got down to the goal line. I look at the New Orleans game. They only lost 34-31. I look at the Washington game. Yeah, they lost and they lost by 8, but they were trying late. So, with Kyle Allen in there, they're chucking the ball. They keep trying to score. They're clearly not a team defensively I want to back, but I just don't have interest in the Colts at this point in time. That, you went to Brissett, what you have, but to put up 205 yards, have a no-hearted effort, play 3 of your last 4 on the road, this is your final game and you're going to Jacksonville on the road again. That just doesn't seem to me the right fit to be backing a team laying almost a touchdown.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree. If I could see a close game ensuing there with those particular teams. Christian McCaffrey, always a lethal weapon. We'll see how that one goes. Baltimore's going to take on Cleveland. Here we saw a massive move right off the bat. Baltimore opened 7. 49 the total. Game went almost immediately to 10. It's hovered at 10 for the most part. Couple of places out there have gone over the 10. I think that's simply due to teaser implications. But the total 49 now down to 48. And listen, Cleveland, it's a team that really hasn't recovered at any point this season. I mean, there's been little hints of an ascension and then right back down. The Myles Garrett circumstance was probably the final straw here. And now I see Denzel Ward is possibly out of this game, another key Cleveland defender. It's impossible, Ralph, at this point in time, unless I were to see the number to be just too huge to lay with Baltimore. But I don't know what's too huge to lay with the Ravens right now. A team that scores on average over 30 points per game can make a number like 10 look small at times. Cleveland, certainly divisional rival. Baker Mayfield, has had his ups and downs all season long. But I don't know that there's a clear-cut reason to back the Cleveland Browns. Even, in the NFL, you love to play double-digit dogs for the most part. Certain years, things differ. But for me, it would have to be Baltimore or not at all here.
Agree. Baker Mayfield, the 17-17 ratio. I have been on my soapbox, Rob, all year talking about how Freddie Kitchens is overmatched. This person was an interim OC for 7 or 8 games last year. He gets the head coaching job. The ownership allows him to then be the OC as well. I mean, you need an elite coach with a veteran quarterback to be double duty as the head coach and OC. And there's been numerous times he's just made ludicrous calls, the challenges, the plays. I just think they're overmatched. One angle, Rob, since 2014, only 16 times has a division foe lost as a home favorite in the first game and then been an away favorite the second game. Those 16 teams have gone 12-4, 75% against the spread. You remember Baltimore was a significant home favorite back game number 4 against Cleveland. The Browns won that game 40-25. So you have same season home loss revenge, your only home loss of the season. John Harbaugh has, all the power in the world to lay it on Cleveland. It wouldn't surprise me if he embarrasses them.
Yeah, and for all the credit that GM John Dorsey gets for player personnel acquisitions and whatnot, almost every step of his career, I don't know how much of
well deserved. Yeah.
And I just don't know how much of a say he had in Freddie Kitchens hiring, or if that was direct ownership overriding Dorsey. But if it was Dorsey's call, might be one that he would regret at this point.
Oh, Kitchens just got approved for another year. They said he is going to be back. So, Be it whatever it is, whatever pictures. I'm gonna give a Prez line here. Whatever pictures he has over the GM or the owner, that's the only reason Freddie Kitchens is going to be back next year.
That sounds like Prez. Absolutely sounds like Prez. So we agree Baltimore the side in that game if you're going to play. Dallas and Philadelphia may be the most meaningful game of the weekend, Ralph. And there's a few of them. We still have a couple that we're going to hit on that are meaningful. But Dallas and Philadelphia, despite the significance of the outcome of this game, just the rivalry between the two, Dallas and Philadelphia. I happen to be, after my 12-year stint living in Las Vegas, now tucked into the southeastern corner of Pennsylvania, about 35 minutes away from the stadium here. And boy, oh boy, Ralph, I mean, these fans were lined up on the Ben Franklin Bridge ready to take the plunge. Phillies come back with 2 consecutive victories, although boy, they weren't resounding victories when you consider the opponents. Life and death against the Giants, life and death against the Redskins. They get a fortunate cover against the Redskins last week. Just not playing well. A lot of that due to injury. A lot of that due to, just defensive failure. A team that 4 or 5 weeks ago got its entire secondary back and things were supposed to improve, and they just have not improved. Going to play Dallas here off of their best game of the season against the Rams last week, a game in which they ran for 263 yards. I don't believe they'll run for 263 against the Eagles. But the old saying that people bet what they saw last would indicate that general public money would be all over the Dallas Cowboys in this case. They opened 1. They're up to 2.5. You could argue fundamentally for sure they're the more talented team in this game. Will that talent and those fundamental advantages ride them to a field goal victory here to cash a ticket, or does Philly have something to say about it here?
Rob, I want to put this in perspective. The Dallas Cowboys are plus 110 yards per game. If you look back in the NFL over the last 4 years, no NFL team has been over plus 100 yards per game. So Dallas is as good statistically. San Francisco this year is also plus 100 yards per game. They are as good statistically as any team in the NFL has been over the last 4 years. Now, some may say, well, that's because they got behind and they had garbage yards late. But when you have played 14 NFL games and you're plus 110 yards per game, that just shows something. Ezekiel Elliott, 1,200 yards. Amari Cooper, 1,000 yards. Dak Prescott, 26 touchdowns. I agree with you. The eye test clearly says Dallas. They've proved me wrong a few times, losing back-to-back-to-back games. But I will say those back-to-back games were at New England, at home against Buffalo on a short week off the New England loss, and then at the Bears, which we know is still a top 10 defense, no matter if Trubisky is the quarterback or not. So it's eye test or nothing for me with the Cowboys.
Yep, they're the better team, Ralph. There's no question. I've seen enough of Philadelphia. They're deficient across that offensive line, and a team that's really predicated defensively on being able to get to the quarterback and pressure the quarterback. That pressure's been non-existent. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick threw all over them. They couldn't overwhelm a Miami Dolphin offensive line. They couldn't overwhelm the Giants or the Redskins. So Dallas's offensive line could take charge here. They need to come to play one time the way they did last week. Arizona at Seattle. Seattle currently the number 1 seed in the NFC. It's all in their hands. It's right in front of them. They win out, they're going to be your number 1 seed here. And I know that point differential-wise, they don't knock anybody over, but they just win football games. And generally speaking, if it's close, they put it in Russell Wilson's hands. Russell Wilson goes out and wins it for them. Sometimes, Ralph, in years past, I used to think that this team would wait until they needed Russell Wilson to pull them out of the fire and then ask him to do so, and he did. Here they open 10, 48.5 the total. They remain a 10-point favorite. I see some 9.5s, though, so it's come down about a half a point in numerous locations. Total up from 48.5 to 51, expecting a lot of offense here. Kyler Murray and company, they do keep throwing the football around. We know that Cliff Kingsbury, that's his nature. They're going to keep trying to work on this offense. all season long. Seattle's been vulnerable to an extent on the defensive side of the football. So side or total, anything that we should be looking at here with Arizona at Seattle?
Well, I think what you said is correct, that you have a first-year head coach who is his first year in the NFL with a rookie quarterback, and you're not going to stop chucking the ball. That means the back door is always open. Russell Wilson, he rushed 3 times last game. I think the only time it mattered was when they were trying to kill that clock the last minute and he ran out. So completely agree with you that they're happy with a win. I think the back door is always wide open. To me, it'll be the Cardinals or pass. Don't know if I'll get there, but Seattle's record at home is not good. Seattle record as a dog is great because that's the way they play ball under Pete Carroll and with Russell Wilson.
And just real quick to enhance the backdoor point that you made there, Ralph, Seattle staring San Francisco right in the eyes in the closing week of the season, which will likely be for the division title and the number 1 seed. You could very well see Seattle get out early, Pete Carroll pull his troops, put some reserves in to keep them healthy for San Francisco, and backdoor gets open even a little bit more. Sunday night, Kansas City travels to Chicago. KC, boy, Pat Mahomes looked pretty good in the snow the other day, even proclaimed himself in the locker room afterwards to be a snow quarterback. So no weather, whatever takes place in Chicago, is going to affect the Kansas City Chiefs. They virtually play in the same type of cold and weather conditions. I know Chicago's are slightly worse, but still, we wouldn't expect Kansas City to be affected by any weather here. They open as a 4-point favorite, 45 the total. They've jumped up to 6. I even see a 7 out there right now, Ralph. Total 45 down to 44, 43 and a half. The Bears offense, I know you'll go through some numbers here, has not been good all season long. The Bears, they do that lateral play that makes it all the way to the 2-yard line last week with an opportunity to maybe get it in the 2-point conversion and tie Green Bay, but it doesn't happen. So they are, not mathematically, but for all intent and purposes, it's difficult for them to make the playoffs. KC, Chicago, motivation on KC's side, of course. They want to finish in the 1 or 2 slot to get a bye and then home field. How do you see KC, Chicago going?
Well, when I look at Kansas City, what's impressed me the most is their defense. 332 yards to Oakland, 278 yards to Tom Brady in New England, 251 yards last week, be it in the snow against a rookie quarterback. But, I think Kansas City is clearly a team here that has its destiny in front of them. The defense now gives them a legitimate shot to be the AFC contender, I think, moving forward. But I look at the Bears, and again, their defense to me, you allow 3.8 yards per carry. You're allowing 227 yards per game passing. You're playing your final home game. I'm looking at one way, and it's under. The Bears are 1-6 when Trubisky gets sacked 3 or more times. The win was against Washington. The Bears are 5-2 when he doesn't get sacked. KC, though, over their last 8 games, has 28 sacks. Granted, 9 of them against Denver made it a big number, but they had 4 against Tennessee. They had 3 at New England. You can go on the road and you sack Fitzpatrick with Henry at running back, and you can sack Brady on the road. That shows to me that the defense is finally playing to a level that can compete to the offense and not all of a sudden need the offense to go down and score every time they have the ball. That to me is the difference in the Chiefs. With that said, though, I have no interest in backing them as a favorite on the road in this number. Under for me.
Yeah, Ralph, I think, you hit the nail right on the head as far as I'm concerned. That 9-sack game against Denver happened to be when Patrick Mahomes was hurt. And Steve Spagnuolo, a guy that we both know throughout his career as a defensive coordinator, has been aggressive. On that Monday night against Denver, where Denver was attracting money because of the backup quarterback situation, Mahomes being injured, he turned the tables on this season for his defense when he decided we're going to blitz, and we're going to blitz again. And they really haven't stopped sending extra men at the quarterback because based on the personnel that he has, that's the way they're going to win ball games. They're not going to be able to do what they did last year and sit back and allow people to pick them apart. So kudos to Steve Spagnuolo for turning it around for this team.
Rob, I can't agree with you more. There are so many coordinators that get stuck in the way they normally do their job that they're not smart enough to change. Spagnuolo is not a guy that used to blitz a lot. And all of a sudden he said, we need the blitz to be successful. To me, that is the coordinator you need on your team to move forward in the playoffs.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, he gives KC a chance now. The offense can go get 30 and win a game. They don't have to get the 40 at this point in time. Let's close it out, Ralph, with Green Bay and Minnesota. It's the Monday Nighter. It's as big a game as we're going to get this week. Two teams that dislike each other, two fan bases that dislike each other, and they're playing for what could be the NFC North title. First time around in this game, I just want to point out, Green Bay jumped to a 21-0 lead in that contest. I think they had 21 points in the first 17 minutes of that game. From the 13-minute mark of the second quarter through the rest of the game, Minnesota won that game 16-0 and had a chance to win the game a couple of times, actually. So I think they remember that a little bit. Green Bay, to me, Ralph, and I don't know how you feel about them, but I'm on the bandwagon with the people that say they're not impressed by Green Bay this season. Especially, I'm not going to point toward the offensive side, but I'll point to the defensive side where after the first couple of weeks, they were getting some quarterback sacks and being praised heavily for offseason acquisitions to that pass rush. Since then, that pass rush has fallen off. The defensive secondary has been a mess. You've got Adam Thielen back in the mix now for Minnesota, a team that has been dynamite at home so far this season. They opened 4.5, 46.5 the total. Game's been bet upward in favor of the Vikings to 5.5. Total now 46.5 for the most part. Go ahead. How do you see this one panning out here between Green Bay and Minnesota?
Well, I used to tweet out a couple huge numbers with Minnesota against non-division foes at home. But, it isn't much different this year. You look at Minnesota, their losses at Green Bay, at Chicago, at Kansas City, at Seattle. So 3 playoff teams plus the Bears. At home, they're a different team. Why? You can hear your play changes. You can hear the cadences. The play action with Dalvin Cook works. The receivers are faster on turf. I just think Minnesota's a much better team at home relative to what the Packers can be on the road. Packers on the road this year, Rob, minus 107 yards per game. Packers on the road this year, averaging 271 yards. I don't think Packers get it done on the road. I like Minnesota.
Yeah, I would agree, Ralph. I think that's a good spot for them. The stadium will be crazy. For those of you that are concerned a little bit, and this probably applies to your fantasy team too, with the status of Dalvin Cook, who got banged up a little bit last week, I don't think you need to fear too much. Alexander Madison, the kid from Boise State, has really proven to be a top-notch backup and may be able to handle the running chores at home if, in fact, Cook can't go. So to me, even without Cook, it's probably not that much of a deal here in this particular contest. Go ahead.
One last number, Rob.
Yeah.
Minnesota at home with Kirk Cousins completing 80% of his passes. The next best at home this year was Drew Brees at 77%, and that was after his 29 of 30 performance against Monday night. So put that in perspective. Drew Brees at home off a 29 of 30 night, 77%. Kirk Cousins at home, 80%.
If he's on your fantasy roster, start him. If you have Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, start him. Kirk Cousins at home, just a different animal. I would be remiss here before we close this thing out, Ralph, if I didn't mention wagertalk.com. For those of you who just listened to Ralph and myself, guide you through the NFL card this week, you want to pick up Ralph Michaels' selection packages at wagertalk.com. Certainly an expert in more than one sport, guys. It's the college sports. You just heard him on the NFL. I know, Ralph, you're a lover of college basketball. Bowl season upcoming. I'm not sure what's available as of now, but I'm sure that plays are available each and every day. If you want to go ahead and describe to people what you have coming, go ahead. I'll give you a couple seconds here to go ahead and tell them.
Rob, we just got done with videos, and I talked to Johnny, talked to Marco. We're doing a special at both Wager Talk and Sports Memo. It'll be active starting tomorrow on Thursday. We know normally a week of 7-day all-access service is $119. You can get any Sports Memo or Wager Talk capper, including you or myself, for the rest of December for $119. That's the majority of the bowls. That's a couple weeks of the NFL. That's NBA. That's NHL. That's college basketball. $119 the rest of December.
There you have it. Those of you watching, listening, special being run here for the remainder of December. Sports Memo and Wager Talk. Ralph, my pleasure, buddy, to have you on the show to talk NFL with you. Hopefully it's not the last time. Hopefully it's just the beginning of many, many more. But I want to thank you for joining me here, helping me through what is Prez's show. I'll turn it over to him when he gets back. But for now, it's you and I. And I want to thank you one more time for joining me tonight.
Let me remind anyone, if there's any thumbs down, that means you absolutely love Prez and want him talking much more.
So go ahead and like this show, everybody. We're going to close it out here. You will see us both all over Wager Talk Media tomorrow, each day of the week. Multiple shows being done by all the handicappers at Sports Memo and Wager Talk as we try to bring you the best information we can, content that'll help you cash tickets. Ralph, good luck to you this weekend. I will talk to you soon, buddy.
Rob, a pleasure. Thanks, bud.
That'll do it for the presidential address. Join us tomorrow when we'll have, I believe it's Mid-Major Matt on the Betting Edge.